Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining me here on the Noble Crumb. My name is Jason. So today what I wanted to share with you is my recipe for a perfect pie crust. Now, the thing that makes my pie crust a little bit different, some people only use all butter, some people only like to use all lard or vegetable shortening. I tend to combine the two, and for me, it just gets the results that I've always wanted. So I get that kind of tender, flaky, and crispy crust every time. And again, pastry can sometimes be a little bit tricky, but hopefully with my video here, it can be a little bit more simplified for you. Just keep in mind, I think at the end of the day, the big thing is always how much water that you add to it. So just make sure when we get to that stage where we're adding the water, you're just adding enough so that it kind of clumps together and combines into a ball. Too much water and too much overworking is going to lead to a really hard and not good pie crust. So to get going, here are the ingredients that you're going to need for our pie crust.
And here are all the ingredients you're going to need to make my pie crust. So we're going to need 2.5 cups of flour, 1/2 cup of shortening, 3/4 cup of butter, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar because this is a sweet pie. If you're doing a savory pie, you can skip the sugar, 1 egg yolk, 1 teaspoon of vinegar, and ice cold water that we're going to add 1 tablespoon at a time.
Okay, so to start with my pastry, I am doing mine in a stand mixer. You can do yours either by hand, stand mixer, or even a food processor. This is just the way that I personally like doing it myself. So I have all my ingredients measured, so we're going to do this really quick. So I've got my 2.5 cups of flour. That in there. And I've got 1 teaspoon of salt. My 2 tablespoons of sugar. And I'm gonna start with my shortening. So I've got my 1/2 cup of shortening that I have basically cut up, I'll try to show it here, into little cubes. Now, I'm gonna start with this first. The reason that I'm doing this before I add in my butter is I'm gonna wanna coat my flour a little bit with the fat, which just helps lending itself to the overall finished product. Okay, so we're gonna put this, and I'm just literally gonna give this a little mix just to coat the flour. All right, now we're gonna move on to our butter. So I've got my 3/4 cup of butter, if I can actually try to get it in the picture there, that have been cut into little cubes as well. And I'm gonna start plunking these in. All right, and I'm gonna turn this on again for a minute. Okay, now that it's all kind of combined with the flour, I'm actually going to take my bowl off of the stand mixer. Okay, so I've got my bowl here off of the mixer, and what I'm going to do is now I'm going to use my hands. And what I'm basically going to do is, as I'm kind of going through the flours, I'm going to start breaking these little chunks of butter with my fingers. And I'm going to start doing it quickly. Basically, I just want to remove the chunks. And we're going to start working this together as quickly as I can until we get to a kind of like a sandy kind of consistency, I guess you'd call it. Now you're probably asking, why am I using my hands when I have my stand mixer? So I like the stand mixer for the fact that it can, first of all, you get that little coating of the shortening on the flour. But when I start adding in my liquid, the water and all that, the way it mixes it, you'll get a quicker, you'll see the consistency a lot quicker because the water is what's going to make or break any good pastry. And because I won't be using my hand, it's not going to melt the butter as much. That's why I like using the stand mixer. I just can see my consistency a lot quicker than if I start adding and mixing the water in by hand.
I never did have much luck by doing it with a food processor, so this has always been kind of my go-to way after years and years of trial and error. Now, as far as the chunks of butter, it's great to have some larger ones, some smaller ones, because that's just what's going to lead to a flakier crust at the end. This is almost done. Okay. So you can see I've got a really nice consistency here. It's almost kind of sand-like. There are some bigger chunks of butter. There's really small ones. That's how I like to do my pastry. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back onto the stand mixer with my paddle attachment, and we're going to start adding in the last of the ingredients. Alright, so we're back at the stand mixer. So to this, I'm going to add my 1 egg yolk and a teaspoon of just plain white vinegar.
Did he just say vinegar? Okay, so the reason for the vinegar. Vinegar or any kind of acid, you can use lemon juice if you'd like, will help inhibit the gluten development within the pastry, and it's also going to tenderize your dough. This is just an added thing to help make your pastry a lot more tender and flaky and more delicious. And personally, my nanny always used white vinegar in her pastry dough whenever she did it, so what was good enough for her is going to be good enough for me.
And then finally, we're going to start adding water. So I've got my water just here in a glass. It is ice cold right out of the fridge. I'm going to start by adding 2 tablespoons, and we'll go from there, because you never know how much you're actually going to use, because there's a lot of factors of how much liquid you're going to have to use in your actual pastry. So now we'll turn this on a very low speed. You do not want to go quick. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add 2 more tablespoons. Basically, we're adding just enough water until it actually starts coming together into almost like a ball. Okay. And I'm going to add 1 more tablespoon, and that might be it. All right, so you can see now this is all kind of started to clump together. This is good, so I'm gonna take this off of the stand mixer, sorry, and I'm gonna put it together into a ball. Okay, so that is what my pastry looks like at the moment. So now I'm gonna dump this out onto my surface here. And basically, I am not going to knead this dough. I'm literally just gonna combine it into a ball. You do not want to knead the dough, because that's going to lead to a very tough pastry. But when it all comes together here, let's see if I can show you. I've got, hopefully you can see, I can see big chunks of butter, I can see little chunks of butter. That's what you want. So now what I'm going to do is I've got a big piece of plastic wrap. Actually, I'm going to do this way. Just move this over, and I'm going to make sure that this is 100% completely covered with my plastic wrap, and we are going to put this in the fridge to rest. You don't want the air getting to this, because it will dry out. So that is completely sealed. This is going to go into the fridge to rest, and I recommend resting the pastry in the fridge for at least 3 hours before using it.
So when it comes to resting the dough, you might be asking yourself, why am I spending all this time just leaving the pastry in the fridge? With pastry, again, with that kind of consistency and texture that you want, we want to make sure that when we are working the flour that we're letting it rest so that that gluten again tends to relax, leading to a more tender and more beautiful tasting pastry. You don't want anything tough and hard and just not very good. So resting the dough is essential and is the key to a perfect crust.
All right, so it's been a couple hours here and my dough has chilled. So now I'm going to open this up and we're going to start rolling out the bottom layer of our pie crust. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut it in half. And then the other half we're going to wrap back up and put it in the fridge because we will use that in a bit later. All right. So I'm going to take my dough and I'm just going to press this into a ball shape before I start rolling. Okay. So on my work surface here, I am going to sprinkle some flour. Obviously, this is just to help it so it doesn't stick. Put the pastry right on there, and then we will roll this out to a size that will fit our pie plate, and we're going to want it to leave extra obviously just on top for the crust. Might be a bit easier if I have my light on. So I'm going to work fairly quickly because obviously the less we can have the butter melt, the better. Keeping this nice and floured so you don't get anything stuck. But this dough rolls out really nice. Try not to hit the camera as I'm doing it. All right, so that looks like it'll fit. So now, here's a really quick trick, I should say, to get your pastry into your pie pan. Take your rolling pin, make sure it's floured, and basically put it at the end here and literally just roll it over on itself like this. Take your pie plate right there and literally roll it right back over. Easy and done. And I'm going to gently get that into the pan, making sure everything is nice and even. Okay. That has fit in there very nice. I'm just going to take just a basic butter knife here and just with the back of it just go right around the edge of the pastry, cutting off the excess. If it starts to crack like that, literally just press it back. It's not a big deal. My pies never tend to turn out completely perfect because for me it's more about taste than looks. Okay. If you see any little gaps, literally just press it in. All right. That looks fantastic now. So now at this point, I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap, and this is going to go back into the fridge for 30 minutes, or if you're pressed for time, into the freezer for 15 minutes just to let that butter harden up again. So I've got my plastic wrap here. I'm just going to cover that. And that is good to go chill.
Alright, so now that you've made your pie crust, it's time to bake it. So depending on how you're going to use it and what type of pie you're going to bake is going to determine how you should bake your pie crust. So if you're going to make a pie that's, say, like a custard filling or any type of filling that is pre-cooked before it goes into the actual pie crust, you're going to want to blind bake your pie crust. That means you put your pastry into the pan, you're gonna prick it with a fork, and then you're gonna basically want to fill it with pie weights or beans just to help to prevent shrinkage. You're gonna put it into the oven at about 400 degrees for about 15 minutes. Remove your pie weights if you're using them and continue to bake for another 10 to 15 minutes until the pie crust is nice and golden brown and fully cooked all the way through. You'll then let it cool, fill it with your pie filling, and you're done. The next option is cooking your pie crust with the actual filling inside of it. So basically you put your bottom layer in, add your filling, cover it with your top layer of pastry, and bake it in the oven, usually at about 425 for about 30 minutes until nice and golden brown and everything's fully cooked through. Now the third option, which is what I generally like to do, is if I'm doing something where I am going to cook the filling in with the pastry, I like to do a quick part-way blind bake of the bottom shell. The reason for this is you want to kind of make sure that that bottom pie crust stays nice, crispy, tender, and it doesn't go all soggy. So what I'll do is I'll put the bottom layer in, prick it with a fork, put my pie weights in, put it in the oven at about 400 for about 15 minutes, remove it from the oven, add in my filling, add the top layer, and then bake it for the full 30 minutes at about 425. This way I ensure that my bottom layer of my pastry is nice and crisp. Alright everybody, and that is my recipe for my perfect pie crust. I hope you give it a try and let me know what your results are like. And as always, like, subscribe, comment. I'm loving hearing from everybody, and I will see you guys next time here on the Noble Crumb. Bye.